Last year in Paris at COP21, of course, the end of the COP was marked by the Paris Agreement, which in some sense is a guide to policy by setting national objectives. However, the beginning of COP, the very first day, is when 20 leaders, including President Obama, announced Mission Innovation. Mission Innovation is a commitment by these 20 countries that collectively invest about $15 billion a year in energy technology R&D to double that to $30 billion over a 5-year period. So this was very important in the sense that it acknowledged the critical role of innovation in meeting our climate goals. So the mission innovation countries span the world. In North America, we have, not surprisingly, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And we work together now much more closely in terms of regional activities in clean energy. We have South America with Brazil, Chile, the Far East, of course, very, very importantly, China as a major economy and the world's largest emitter, but also South Korea, Japan, and Indonesia, a country less advanced in the development curve, but very interested in innovation. We have countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. We have the UAE, the Emirates. We have the EU, but also 9 European countries individually, and that includes, of course, the large economies like Germany and UK and France and Italy. So it's a very, very broad collection of countries, and again, very importantly, these countries represent probably something like 75 or 80% of the world's investment in clean energy technology. Actually, probably even a bit more than that. So, as I said earlier, a doubling from around 15 billion to 30 billion is what we expect. Now, the countries have gotten together in the intervening year in a number of ways, including a workshop that identified 7 initial areas for focus. They're called innovation challenge areas, and they again span some of the obvious, perhaps, areas like advanced biofuels and energy storage, but they also go to areas like carbon capture and to the conversion of sunlight into fuels. At the same time that mission innovation was announced, Bill Gates, representing 28 international investors, announced the Breakthrough Energy Coalition to put forward patient capital to take advantage of this expanded innovation pipeline that will come from the doubled R&D. So fundamentally, in Paris, a linkage was made: innovation, investment, policy, all working synergistically to meet our goals. I will add to that the innovation is really critical. Sometimes there's what I would call a false choice put forward. Namely, some will argue, well, we have all the technologies we need. Let's just get them deployed. Others say, no, we need new technologies, big breakthroughs. The answer, obviously, is we need both. That is, in the relatively short term, we need to deploy the technologies that we see with major cost reduction. But for the long term, we are going to need to get much, much more ambitious to go to deep decarbonization. And I certainly believe, as do others, that we will need some big breakthroughs to meet those kinds of deep decarbonization goals. We have to span all the sectors, and that includes industry, where, after all, if we're going to have this climate transformation, it has to occur together with continuing manufacturing industries and the like. Well, those are going to have to also be low carbon. So it's a very, very broad agenda. And we will not get there, in my view, without success in innovation. And I will also emphasize innovation that links governments, investors, entrepreneurs, obviously technologists, all working together. The innovation change that we need is one that is ideal for students to get engaged with. And I know from my career at MIT, students were tremendously excited about joining this transformational effort. Now, when I say students, obviously, scientists and engineers are central to the technology innovation that we require. However, I want to emphasize that the innovation needs are much broader than technology innovation, and that's why we had students from across the entire institute engaged. So, for example, business model innovation is going to be critical in a low carbon world. So, certainly, our business school students, our Sloan School students at MIT, were in fact leaders in pursuing these sustainable goals. Policy innovation is going to be needed. So we had our political scientists, economists, very, very deeply involved. And of course, it's also issues like urban design. We see, of course, urbanization is one of the major demographic trends around the world. We're heading towards 70% urbanization in this half century globally. So the roles of cities, how they are designed, how transportation systems are integrated with advanced urban design is critical. So our architects, our urban planners, they were all engaged. Uh, Buildings are places where we absolutely need to get much greater efficiency. The building itself and what's inside the building. One more point I would make is that the impact of this innovation will be very synergistic with policy. For example, if we think in terms of a carbon price, the carbon price, innovation individually will have major impacts, but when you put them together, they can have a much bigger impact. My physicist background says nonlinear. And that's because, for example, even a modest carbon policy, if we have the fruits of innovation in terms of lowering costs and expanding opportunity, what you'll see is that policy will drive deployment of those technologies much faster. So that's the kind of synergy that we will need to meet our deep decarbonization goals. There's a real question about how to get these policies in place, how to stimulate market demand. Well, there's a lot that we can do, but I will note that in the energy business, capital allocations can be massive, require a long time. They're decadal in their formation, and those investments have to pay off over many decades. Many of the capital assets in the energy business have a very, very long lifetime. The point of that is that business, in my view, is looking for clear signals. Because if they're going to have big infrastructure investments, for example, or big power plant investments, those investments for, say, 2030 have to start being formulated in 2020, to pick numbers somewhat arbitrarily. But the idea is they are decadal. And so business would like to know what, what are the rules of the game? How are the rules of the game going to support their capital allocations for long-lived assets in a deep decarbonization world? I think the climate change goals, the national goals that have been set in Paris, for example, I think will be met because, for one thing, Mother Nature will keep talking to us about the need to respond, and what we are seeing already is large amounts of resource is needed already to respond to what we are seeing from global warming. Let's just take the recent example in the United States of Hurricane Matthew. Well, in fact, Hurricane Matthew did lead to a loss of power to about 3 million customers in the Southeast, but the recovery from that was actually much faster than it had been earlier, say, for Sandy along the East Coast. And why was that? It was because a utility, I use Florida Power and Light as an example. I visited them earlier in 2016. Well, they had invested as one utility $2 billion in terms of improved resilience to the kinds of storms and flooding that Florida is more and more prone to in this world of global warming. And those 2 billion are the first of another 2 billion that they will be spending in the next couple of years. Well, when one utility is having to spend billions and billions of dollars adapting, they have an interest in seeing mitigation be successful. So the reality is, I think the public is more and more aware that, first of all, the climate is changing, that we have to respond to that. And I think eventually the clearly correct notion that investing in mitigation now is overall the economically preferable way to go. I will note that there's another very important factor, in my view, where we do need to spend more attention and devote more effort, and that is that in any societal transformation, and we see that in many ways with technology, with globalization, and now in going to a low carbon energy system, there are dislocations. Overall, the economy can do very well. Overall, we in the United States, with our frankly innovation edge, can access a multi-trillion-dollar market globally for these new technologies. But there will be communities and regions that are more on the flip side of that equation. So I think that we also need a clear job strategy. We need a strategy that looks at the distribution of benefits across our society so that we get tailwinds and not headwinds as we pursue our innovation agenda and our energy system transformation. The innovation needs are certainly global in a variety of ways. One way, first of all, is we need to bring all the talent we can bring to bear on this innovation challenge, and that talent is certainly distributed around the world. I think in the United States, we have the advantage of a mature innovation system that our entrepreneurs and investors and technologists can fit into. But another point is that the needs, uh, the portfolio for a low carbon future will also look very different regionally and in different countries around the world. And clearly, very often, one can best innovate in a local context in which the needs are understood and the needs drive the innovation as opposed to the other way around. So you can imagine that the way this innovation is materializes, let's say, in an industrialized society with a well-developed infrastructure, sometimes with the burden of a well-developed and old infrastructure, will look very different from a country that is just in the earlier stages of development and has both the challenge of not having adequate energy services today, but also the opportunity to develop a 21st century infrastructure that is not burdened by history. So there are pluses and minuses, and innovation will have to serve all of these needs globally.